making sure I'm getting myself together here. All right. Well. Hello, everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle from A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. If you are unfamiliar with this show, let me tell you what this show is about. This is the show where we like to talk that real talk. We like to talk about those things that you don't really like to say out loud. We like to answer those questions that you always wanted answers to. Well, this is the show where we do that. And we like to focus on certain arenas. We like to focus on things in whether it's education, social services, employment, mental health. In the past, we've done episodes on being a child of divorce, on financial literacy. So we do a lot of things and we cover a lot of ground here. And today is no different. I am excited about this episode because I am going to ask the question that a lot of us want the answer to. And that question is, what is a podcast? That is a question that I am going to have answered today. What is a podcast? I don't know what's going on. Maybe in the past 3 or 4 years, or definitely during the pandemic, podcasts and web series have blown up. And today we are going to talk about it. So that is a question that we are going to answer in this episode. What is a podcast? And I have a guest who is going to answer that question for us. His name is Vikram Rajan, and I can't wait to tell you about him. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So, who is Vikram Rajan? Let me tell you who he is. So, Vikram Rajan is the co-founder of Video Socials, a community of lawyers, accountants, coaches, and consultants who get their video blogs and podcast promo videos recorded together, fun, and done. That's in quotes. Vic then started the Brander app to facilitate social media automation for Video Socials members, and in December 2021, started Video Socials VIP, which now manages over 14 video interview podcasts. Vic is the author of 365 Marketing Thumb Rules, daily reminders for Rainmakers, and has been quoted in 4 other business books: Wall Street Journal, the Journal of Accountancy, and Forbes. Vikram has presented marketing seminars on behalf of every major bar association and CPA societies in the US, or in the 3 US, in the United States. So that is a lot of background there, and that makes me even more excited to have him on the show. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Vikram to the stage right now. Hi, Vikram. How are you doing today?
Hi, Gabrielle. I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So I wanted to have this discussion because this seems to be blowing up ever since the pandemic started, but apparently it started years before. So
yeah,
I'm hoping you can shed some light on this. So let's start with the basic question. What is it? What is a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, so podcast, right, is kind of branded after the Apple iPod, and I guess it's kind of their innovation, their concept based on what radio shows have been doing, what audiobooks have been, but they came up with this concept of a podcast, right, where it would be either a solo presentation, much like I'm the only one on the screen right now, so I'm presenting information, or when Gabrielle comes back and I'm having a conversation with her, and that's more of an interview style. So you have those two main aspects of a podcast, of it being a recording and historically being an audio recording that you would listen to originally through iPod and Apple iTunes, that they've kind of turned Apple iTunes podcast area, specifically now Apple Podcasts. But since then, Google Podcasts is a rather late entry, but they've become a dominant player. Spotify was just sooner than Google Podcasts, but they're now kind of second place. Then you have other apps like Stitcher, which I use on my Android phone because for a long time Google Podcasts wasn't around and I can't use Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts on my Android. So I use Stitcher. I'm in the transition to Google Podcasts right now. But then you have smaller and minor players in that mix as well. But between Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, those are probably the top three that accounts for like 90, maybe even 99% of the people who listen to podcasts. Spotify has just started to support video podcasts, and video podcasts can be known as a web series or a video show, and would be, of course, on YouTube. So you're not just listening, but you're watching, which I prefer video interview podcasts for that reason, which we can go into a little bit later. But that's quite simply what a podcast is. Now, I think the phrase podcast has become more generalized and kind of stopped being so much of a branded phrase, where I think podcast was originally a branded word, much like Xerox or aspirin, and there are a variety of those, right? The corporate brand names that kind of turned into a general term. So generally speaking, we can call everything a podcast if it's on Spotify, Google, et cetera. And these are kind of spoken word oriented programs that can be nonfiction and comedic or storytelling, fictionalized, which are very similar to an audiobook. But then you have live streams, much like this, right, where this is streaming live on Facebook and other platforms. Do we call this a podcast? Well, in the traditional definition, no. But in the more modern and generalized definition, sure, why not? It's kind of a catch-all term at this point. So hopefully that answers the question, Gabrielle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So how does it work? So I know there's you listed all the different platforms: Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple. You said Stitcher. I think I saw this Buzzsprout.
Yeah, sure.
Anchor.
Sure. Anchor is owned by Spotify now, so it's kind of one and the same. But then you could then Podbean. I mean, so in the world of podcasts, there are essentially kind of three parts to it that sometimes are all in one, or you can kind of splice it out to more than three. So what do I mean by that? So the first thing is the recording platform. How are you recording the podcast? Right now we're using a platform called StreamYard. I use that a lot with our clients, but you can record natively to Anchor and thus Spotify. You can record natively to things like Podbean. Or you can just record a podcast on Zoom, or just use a audio recorder on your phone and it will record audio. And for all intents and purposes, in a raw way, that's a podcast. Now, there are more sophisticated platforms that enable you to have this intro, like we all heard kind of the cool music for the Hot Topics intro. And then there could be an outro. And the intro itself can be very much like a talk show, where it's like kind of welcome to Hot Topics with your host, Gabrielle. I'm forgetting your last name, Gabrielle. And so that can be kind of a professional voiceover intro, which we do for our clients, and then a professional outro that kind of mentions where to cache the show, et cetera. So those sophisticated post-editing type things can sometimes be on the editing or the recording platform. But if you just use a voice recorder, right, on your phone, all right, just get started, and you could always add those other sophisticated elements later. Now, some platforms like Anchor enable you to have those pre and post, and if you insert a commercial in the middle of your podcast, all those things can be done on Anchor native, or you can do it on a platform like this, StreamYard. But Zoom doesn't really allow for those kinds of things. It's not really meant for podcast recording. You're just kind of using it as an audio recorder, perhaps a video recorder. So that's the first part, getting the recording done one way or another. The second element is the hosting platform, which is where are these recordings going to live? That's you don't want it to originally to live on your hard drive, right, on your computer or on your phone, on its storage, right, its hard drive. But then you're uploading it into a hosting platform that often is also being distribution. I'll say the second element is hosting and distribution. What do I mean by that? Well, it can be hosted or stored anywhere, your Dropbox, your Google Drive, etc., but they don't distribute it to the podcast apps, which is the third element. The podcast apps, which is how your audience listens to the podcast. Apple Podcasts, they may listen to it on Spotify, they listen to it on Stitcher, etc. But you're hosted by, let's say, a platform like Libsyn or Spreaker or RSS.com or Anchor. Those are hosting, or Podbean. You're hosting it, so they are the hard drive, the storage, and they're the distribution, like they're the trucks that go from the warehouse to the retail store. Now, sometimes, to complicate things, the same platform can do the recording, can do the hosting, can do the transportation into the podcast app. End-to-end, soup to nuts, really fun to do. Or there are advantages to using a different recording platform like StreamYard, because it's more video focused, because you'll eventually take the video and put that into YouTube, for example, or stream it live on different social media platforms like Facebook. And then you'll take the audio and upload it into this storage facility, which also has its own virtual trucks into the podcast apps. So hopefully it's not very complicated to understand. Let's say Anchor, for example, owned by Spotify. Anchor, it can be a recording platform. It also stores the data, the actual recording, audio and now video as well, sends it to Spotify, the app, which owns now Anchor, and it will also send it to Apple Podcasts and to Google Podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. There is a fourth aspect to complicate things. The fourth aspect is where the advertisers are, and that's another revenue maker for Spotify. They will get advertisers onto your podcast when you qualify. Very similar to YouTube's platform, where I don't know the exact number, but YouTube will insert ads as pre-rolls on your videos if your channel gets X number of subscribers. Whether or not they share the revenue with you is also kind of depending on the number of subscribers and views, etc. But they'll nonetheless monetize. They'll make the money off your content. And you can say, oh, is that fair that they're making money off your content? Well, they're providing it to you for free, the storage and the traffic. So they get paid. That's how YouTube gets paid. Same thing, Spotify does the same thing. They're providing Anchor for free. We use a different platform for a lot of our clients called Spreaker, but we're in the midst of probably moving into Anchor for a variety of reasons. The main reason is because of the video aspect. I'm a huge fan of video, and it kind of opens up that channel. It also opens up social media channels. Here we're streaming live, so Facebook and LinkedIn, et cetera, they prioritize video content. But unless you stream live into those platforms, you need the video hosted someplace else, like YouTube. And so, for that aspect, most podcast platforms don't support video podcasts other than YouTube right now, and now Spotify, which just happened in the past month, 2 months. Whether or not Google Podcasts and Stitcher will start to adopt the video podcast platform is to be determined. I think if Apple Podcasts does it, which they probably will, that's my conjecture, it's my prediction, because Spotify is right now in number 2 spot compared to Apple Podcasts, and now they included video, which has taken over the internet, as we all know. And so if they're chomping at YouTube and they're chomping at Apple Podcasts, well, they have to now keep up, right? They have to do something to keep the listeners, because if more and more people want to watch podcasts, well, people are going to move from Apple Podcasts to Spotify. And why does that matter to Apple Podcasts? Well, it matters because they get money, they get paid by advertisers. And so if the eyeballs are somewhere else and the ears are somewhere else, well, we're going to advertise through Spotify and not through Apple Podcasts, and that's revenue. Right now, it probably is a very meaningless amount of money, but give it a year from now. It's 2022. Give it a year from now. Who knows what'll happen? These are the things I watch. Running a company that runs podcasts. But I think for those of us who are consuming podcasts, you want to be on all the platforms, at least the 5 major ones. The one I left out was iHeartRadio. iHeartRadio is popular really because they have radio stations constantly pitching their app. I don't, if they didn't have the radio stations, regular terrestrial radio publicizing the app, then I don't think they would have been a player. Also in kind of a number 4 or 5 spot is Amazon, with Amazon Kindle and Echo and all the other kind of devices that they have. I don't know how popular it is native, because I can listen to podcasts on my Echo, but I can listen to it through Spotify or through even Pandora or through Google Podcasts, etc. But that gives you the lay of the land of not only what is a podcast, but how do you get it out there. You can start simply by just an audio recording, but if you're going to do audio, I suggest do video, because you have audio anyway, and now you have YouTube content or Facebook Live content in addition to all the podcast platforms. So hopefully that helps, Gabrielle.
Thank you. Thank you. You gave us a mouthful there. That is awesome. Awesome. All right. So what is this about an RSS feed?
Yeah. RSS feed. Those are the trucks, right? If I mentioned, and there's 3 parts: the recording, there's the hosting, which includes distribution trucks, and then the third element is the app. Well, the connection, the bridge between the truck, in my analogy, between the warehouse of storage that goes to the retail store of the app that you're listening to. Well, the bridge is the RSS feed. RSS is a very old standard. It stands for really simple syndication. It's kind of almost a silly phrase of what RSS means, but the RSS feed is extremely important. RSS feed started originally with blogs, but then thankfully the podcast world adopted the same technology, and it's basically similar to the code that powers websites, HTML type code. And I don't know if it's literally HTML, but it's that type of code that basically has all the data. It does not host, it doesn't send it doesn't send the actual data. It is a link to it. So it tells Apple Podcast app where to grab the episode logo or the show logo. It tells Apple Podcast app where to grab the audio. The audio is still stored wherever. On RSS.com or Libsyn or Spreaker or Anchor, it's stored there, right? That's the warehouse. So my analogy of warehouse, truck, and retail store kind of dies on the vine here because we're dealing with digital information, and so the data doesn't have to literally move into your app, but it does, to complicate matters, when you have your app on your phone and you decide to listen to the show, the episode, and you decide to download the episode, you have in fact moved it from the warehouse to your phone. And it's not really via the RSS feed, but the RSS feed is basically it's the main communication route of your podcast. If you're starting a podcast, you don't really need to worry too much about what's under the hood. Just know that all these hosting platforms are going to give you an RSS feed, and that's gold, right? Like that's the key that you need for all these other platforms.
All right. So you brought up an interesting point about advertisers. So how do I get rich? How do I get rich off my podcast? People seem to be making millions of dollars, or it's $1 billion industry. So I want to get rich. How do I do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm still figuring that out myself, Gabrielle. But in theory, there are 3 or 4 main ways that podcasts make money, or podcasters make money. So podcast monetization, or ROI, return on the investment of time that you're putting in. This is time that Gabrielle is putting in, time that I'm putting in. So there are a couple of ways, right? So the place that most people immediately think of is advertisers. That's what most people think of. That is much more of a long-term perspective, because ultimately advertisers want to know their own ROI. How many people listen to your podcast or watch your live stream? They're in it for the ROI for viewers, listeners, which can be subscribers, downloads. So unless you have a very large audience, or very influential audience, meaning you can prove that, hey, I only have 1,000 listeners, but each of these 1,000 listeners are millionaires and they buy everything that I promote to them. Well, then a bank is going to be like, you know what? I'll advertise you in your podcast. I only reach 1,000, but those 1,000 are all millionaires and they all buy anything that you hawk on your podcast. Let's play ball. So that makes sense. Most of us are not in that position. But if you could say, even in a small case where you are your first advertiser on your own podcast, which is if you are not your own advertiser on your own podcast, then you can't really prove the conversion rate of your metrics. So metrics alone in terms of audience size is not enough because you haven't proven it. Now you can prove it with another advertiser, but you may as well prove it with yourself, where most of the time, so they're, I'll back up and say, look, you can start your podcast for a variety of reasons. There could be a hobby aspect to it. There could be a mission aspect to it. That mission could be a nonprofit or faith-based mission where you are bringing that pursuit out. Without being insulting, I'd almost kind of put it into the same place as hobby, where it's not financially motivated. And then you have the financial motivated, not native in the sense that, hey, I want to get rich just on my podcast, but you have a business around it or behind it, where, for example, you are a professional tutor and you're selling tutoring services to parents that obviously have children, most likely. So from that aspect, that is your tutoring business. Okay, makes sense. My company, I have a content marketing company. So one way or another, I want to sell content marketing services to my type of clients who happen to be mainly lawyers and consultants and coaches and accountants, but mainly lawyers and consultants. So one way or another, I'm trying to convince them that they ought to have a podcast, or that they ought to have a video blog, or that they ought to have a written blog, because it helps them stay top of mind with their referral relationships and potential clients. That's my day job as a sales professional. So this kind of goes into a little bit of it, but how do I monetize it? Well, I am my own advertiser on my own podcast. So anyone watching and listening, I'm looking for them to convert into a client. It's a numbers game, so not every one listener may turn into a client, but what is the conversion? Is it 1 out of 100 listeners, 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 10? Well, we have to figure that out. So my commercial in my own podcast has what we call in the marketing world a lead magnet. Basically, I want my audience to go to a website and type in email address in exchange for something free. So they can get a free video book talking about podcast ROI. So how do I get rich off my podcast is essentially what that video book offers. So they can go to videosocials.vip, which is my web address, and fill out the email and actually get the answer of how they can get rich, of how they can get the ROI off their podcast in the form of a video book. I got your email address. I will now hopefully not harass you to the point that you are annoyed by me, but enough where you don't forget me so that you do business with me. That's one way, right? So well, those are two ways. One is the audience, one is advertisers, or I will call them third-party advertisers, not you. The second way is you being your first advertiser. I highly recommend starting there because first question advertisers going to want to know is, can they make money off this? And if you have at least some anecdotal evidence that, hey, I get clients from this, I get customers through this, I get business through this, and I only have 100 listeners, I only have 1,000 listeners, well, then it doesn't matter about the audience size because you've proven that something works here. Now, if you don't have that, then they're going to say, well, you only have 100 listeners, you only have 1,000, you only have 1 million listeners, but I don't know if anyone's going to buy. I don't even know who these million people are. Now, you can have some demographic information, but why wait? You should be able to sell something through your own podcast or your own business. If you don't really have a business per se, well, maybe we can talk and you can figure out some type of product or something. And that comes a third way. The third aspect is affiliates. So it's not third-party advertiser paying you straight money, straight cash. Second way is you being your own advertiser, start there. Third is being an affiliate for some other company, very similar where you are your own advertiser, but you're advertising someone else's product. For the same reason, they're not paying you cash for the ad, but they will pay you cash when a product is sold. And so you basically have a revenue share, an affiliate link that you're basically advertising. Very, very often advertisers also will give you an affiliate link. They'll pay you the $500 cash for the ad, but also give you 10% for every sale. And that's even better, right? That's a nice icing on the cake. But a lot of times advertisers will say, well, I'm not going to give you $500 cash because I don't know if this thing will work, but I'm willing to give you 10% or 50% of the sale. And if we can make that work, well, maybe you can make more than $500. And the advertiser has no risk also. So that's the third way. The fourth aspect is guests themselves. And the guests can happen in two ways. One, the guests who come onto your, well, three ways. Guests themselves can be monetized on your show. How? Well, some podcasts, if they have all those other criteria, charge their guests for coming on. In full disclosure, at least not yet, Gabrielle has not charged me for coming onto the show, so thank you for not charging me. But some podcasts do charge because they know they have such a potent audience. They say, hey, you're coming on my show. In so many words, you're going to be advertising your services. Because it's pay to play, pay me, and you'll come on my show. I'll treat you as any other guest. You'll kind of hawk whatever product you're hawking, and hopefully you make that money off my audience. Pay to play, and that's one aspect. The second way you can make money off of guests, which is a horrible way of putting it, but fair enough, is the second way is the guests themselves may have an affiliate link. If they're actively selling, I'm not actively selling a product here, right? Go to videosocials.vip, put in your email address, you get something free of a video book, but there's no cash exchange. Now, if I had an event where I said, hey, you should come to my next networking event, it's $50 ticket, you come there, well, maybe I share $10 of it with Gabrielle because you as an audience would not be knowing about my event if it weren't for Gabrielle giving me a platform. So that's fair. I'm cool with giving Gabrielle some money because she enabled me to promote my event or my book or my course or whatever product I happen to be selling or sharing, advertising as a guest. And Gabrielle makes an income off that. Maybe she discloses that to her audience or not. I would almost suggest you disclose. Everyone should kind of know that we're all grown-ups here. It's Gabrielle's having me on because I'm a valuable guest, but if she's able to get paid, great, because you're listening to the show for free. So why shouldn't Gabrielle make money and earn? Because that way she will continue providing value with more and more free episodes. So that's why there should be a profit motive. So from that aspect, that's cool, right? So the first way is pay to play, charge your guests. Whether or not you can get away with that, right? Do you have the audience and the engagement to justify that? Well, that's almost like advertisers. You got to justify it. The second is an affiliate link with the guest. Very similar to advertisers being affiliates, right? You got to figure that out. And then the third aspect, which I like the most, is can you have the right type of guest criteria where the guests themselves are potential clients and or referral relationships for your business? So of all the kind of the 6 ways that I just talked about, I say, hey, number one, you be your first advertiser. And then second, have the right type of guest criteria where you're bringing on guests who are influencers or referral relationships and or potential clients. What do I mean by an influencer? I don't necessarily mean it's the kind of people who make a living being an influencer and call themselves influencers, you know, where that's cool. Maybe that makes sense for you. But everyone is an influencer in some way. Everyone has influence over a couple of dozen people, maybe a couple of hundred people. But you know, if you run a business, where your referrals come from, where business can come from. Those referral relationships are really valuable. And there doesn't even need to be an affiliate link per se. Your referral relationship is coming on. She's going to be talking about her business, which is of value to your clients and to your audience. And in return, you're hoping for your guest to refer business to you, usually in reciprocity or thank you for having them as a guest, or really just because of an external relationship. The reason I like that the most is because that's extremely valuable. Now, some of our clients who host podcasts, if they're a business lawyer, they're interviewing entrepreneurs, other entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs for them are potential clients. So when Dara interviews a potential client, or at least an interview, at least an entrepreneur, well, there's potential to do business directly with that guest. And that could be way more lucrative than an affiliate link or charging the guest to come on, which I actually say don't do as much. First of all, it's rare. Second of all, it's like you have to do a lot of qualifications. And third, there's a lot of free podcasts. So to really charge, I'm not a huge fan of charging guests. But doing business with guests where they're a potential client or referral relationship, that can be extremely powerful. For those, there's kind of 6 main ways right there, and I summarize it in my video book. So if you go to videosocials.vip, you can get that, and basically understanding. And I keep doing my hands like this because I kind of see it as 2 vectors. One is the audience vector, and the other is guest. And there are combinations, 6 combinations that you can really see in terms of monetizing and getting an ROI on your podcast. But keep it simple. Sell your own product and then sell it through your guests, or that's it. So that's the place to start.
All right. So what you're suggesting is advertisers is only one aspect. There's also maybe being strategic about the guests that you have. So having a guest that will bring a lot of viewers or a lot of listeners, or someone who is popular, or probably in my case, being a tutoring company, maybe I'd want a guest that has access to my audience that I'm looking for. Right. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I kind of forgot because it was specifically on monetization is the cross-promotion aspect of your guests. It's why I like video interview podcasts, video to unlock the video platforms in addition to audio interviews. For that reason, Gabrielle, is because now you have that option. For example, I'm excited to share this episode with my circle of influence. This makes me look good to be interviewed on your show. And it helps me get my message out there to my own circle of influence who may have heard it before, or may hear it for the first time, or maybe they're reminded about what I do for a living, but also kind of the insights. Hopefully it's valuable. So regardless, it's a feather in my cap to be on your show. So again, thank you. And so I want to share with my circle of influence. Likewise, every other guest wants to share their episode with their circle of influence. We're all in it for the content marketing aspect of it, and it makes them look good. So when they share their episode, it basically advertises your whole podcast, your show at large, but also your business, which is another reason to be your own advertiser on your show, because I want my whole circle of influence, when they're watching it from me per se, or to learn from me, they get to know you and they get to know your products and services through that commercial break. So it goes all tied up into a nice bundle. So that's a tremendous aspect. So that's why you want to have that guest criteria. Now, it doesn't need to be, yes, to some degree you have a priority of, all right, does this guest have a large social media following? Does he or she have a large email following? Sometimes the guest intake form that I fill out for others asks those questions. I don't ask those questions of my guests, and I interview other podcast hosts. I also don't recommend our clients ask that. It can be a little off-putting because it's like, tell me how much money you have in your bank account, and and it's like, really, that's my first question to a prospect. It's a little off-putting, and so I'm not a huge fan of that. I'll fill it out because we have a pretty good social media following and email lists, etc. But it's like, everyone has influence over people, and a couple of hundred people. It's that Verizon commercial of like, who's behind you. You have a couple of hundred people. It's your wedding list, all that stuff. And that can be extremely powerful. So if I can lead someone to one other client, that's very powerful. I say that all the time to my clients, that if every one of your clients can bring you one more client, well, that's the doubling the penny every day for a month concept. That's extremely powerful. So if every guest can lead me to one more guest and maybe one other potential client, yeah, I could do a lot of business that way. And so you don't have to worry too much about their social media following. They will share their episode. As long as there are no gotcha questions, you're not trying to embarrass them, which most podcast hosts aren't doing. So that's a great point, Gabrielle, of guest cross promotion. And that leads to audience building and traction. So now once you build your audience, that helps your business and then potentially other advertisers, et cetera. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know you have another commitment, so I'm watching the time. But if you could just explain quickly, why podcasting is so popular, especially now, especially during the pandemic. If you could explain, like, why it seems like everyone has a podcast now.
Yeah. So everyone has a podcast. That cuts in both good and bad. Sometimes I say it, and sometimes I have to watch how the person reacts. everyone has a podcast right now, so you should do it too. I'm a sales guy, A, at heart, and B, during the day. So is that a good thing? Do you want to have a podcast too because everyone else has a podcast? Well, sometimes peer pressure, everyone wants to join the crowd, maybe. Some people are purposely cynical and purposely rebellious and purposely won't do it because everyone else is doing it. But really, does everyone have a podcast? I mean, I travel in a circle where, of course, I'm helping my clients start podcasts, and I'm around public speakers and entrepreneurs, et cetera. So I get skewed where a lot of people have podcasts, but most people don't have podcasts. And most people don't even listen to podcasts. So I think we may be swimming in those circles where it seems like everyone has one, but that's not really true. We're still answering a question of what is a podcast. If we're still answering that question, then no, not everyone has a podcast. So should you have one? Well, you'll immediately stand out. Probably in your circle, you'll be the only one that people really knows that has a podcast. Whether or not you should have one, we could talk about that offline. But I guess that question of what was your question, Gabrielle? Oh, should someone have a podcast? Is that your question?
No, it was like, why is it so popular?
Oh, why is it so popular?
To me, it seems so popular.
Is it so popular? Why is it so popular? I think the number one reason of this renaissance or this wave of podcasts, I would say highly attributable to COVID and being locked down and having to be virtual. I think the combination of that and the technology being so much more easy now than it was, let's say, 10 years ago when podcasts first kind of started bubbling up in mainstream. The two worlds, collided, where so many of us can do business via Zoom and other virtual remote facilities that, the two worlds kind of met because we can't go into a recording studio together. We can't go to a networking event together. We can't meet together, but can we do it through a platform like StreamYard or Zoom, et cetera? And so I think the proliferation of content and remote content happened. Really, I would point the finger at COVID. And then because of COVID, we also see the technology is relatively easy to use as well. So that's the second. And then the popularity, as we were just talking about, it's a virtuous cycle. It just begets. Like people who listen to podcasts, they say like, hey, why don't I start one? Like if this guy can have one, maybe I can have one. And so it just proliferates itself in terms of popularity. And then you point to the fact that mainstream media has helped that. Right. So now it's hard to turn on the radio for those. I listen to the radio. For those of us who listen to the radio, it's like every DJ's got a podcast and every, iHeartRadio is talking about their podcast, et cetera. So like every station's got a podcast, et cetera. And then podcasts even advertise on those radio stations. Then you turn on the news, whatever news you're watching, CNN, et cetera. Every one of them, the anchors have, usually the more pundits have their own podcast, but sometimes the anchors have a podcast. So you're hearing the word podcast like all over the place. So I think it plants the seeds of like, hey, I should have a podcast too. So the popularity is there. Part of that, I would say, big numbers, like Spotify paid Joe Rogan $100 million for his podcast. I think that is one of those tipping points that kind of perked everyone's ears up. Of like, hey, maybe Joe Rogan can do it. Maybe I can do it. And maybe I'll get $100 million. The likelihood is that you will not get $100 million, but you can build a business based on your podcast. It doesn't need to be 0 or 100 million, which is not how it is. But it's very similar when Sirius XM, or maybe it was just XM at the time, I forget which of the two platforms that merged, paid same kind of $100 million or some type of figure like that to Howard Stern. And that kind of put them on the map through the notoriety of Howard Stern. And, we're not really arguing whether or not you like Howard Stern or Joe Rogan. That's almost irrelevant. It's the fact that they had the clout enough that to justify these companies paying $100 million. And of course, there was a whole lot of controversy when that happened with Joe Rogan. But it's, outside of that tangent, point is they felt in some business justification that if they pay this guy $100 million, it's going to help their business in some way, either through advertising and or through other people going, if that guy can have a podcast, I can too. And now every podcast that's on the Spotify platform is another node for them to have advertisers. And going back to the ROI monetization, those behemoths have the clout because they are selling the advertisers and they're saying, we'll get you 100 million eyeballs. 90 million of it will be through Joe Rogan and the other 10 million will be on these other smaller podcasts. And smaller, meaning they also have only a few million listeners. And so again, regardless if you agree with Joe Rogan or not, he's got a whole lot of listeners and viewers. And so from that aspect, don't worry about advertisers right away, because the advertisers with the real money tend to get spoken to by the platform, by Spotify, et cetera. That doesn't mean to say that you can't recruit advertisers on a smaller basis and sponsors on a smaller basis, but work on the audience, which means you need to monetize with your own business. So why is it so popular? It's popular because it's popular, but also because of all these other platforms and technologies and forces.
Awesome, awesome. All right, all right. Time is going. All right. So, do you have any? I like to ask my guests any words of wisdom that they want to share. So, as we wrap it up here, um, do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share? Any final words that you would like to impart?
Yeah, so get started and understand why do you want your own podcast. Yes, you can do it for fun. It is fun. This was fun. Thank you, Gabrielle. I think it's fun talking to people if you find that fun. It can be very fulfilling for your mission, be it faith-based or nonprofit, et cetera, for kind of your purpose in life. But then there is that other reason of financially rewarding. As a marketing company, I tend to focus on that because I want to make sure that my marketing services more than pays for itself through the results that we get for our clients. So we tend to look at the podcast as a vehicle towards business building. And so in the beginning, you should know your why, and it can be a combination of all three. It is a combination of visibility, impact, and profit, VIP, visibility, impact, and profit, for your video interview podcast. And you're probably going to be interviewing other VIP to your business, potential clients, and referral relationships. So I use that acronym a lot. And so part of me says, get started, just do it. But then the other part of me says, I subscribe to the philosophy of make a mess first, then clean it up. Get started. You don't have to make a whole mess. You may find yourself where you're not very tech savvy or you're very busy. Well, then you have companies like mine who basically will run the whole thing for you. You just show up at showtime. You literally show up on stage, and the other guest will be in the other chair virtually because you're doing it from your home office or wherever. And everything's queued up. We do the outreach to the guests, we schedule your guests, do the whole intake process, make sure all the audio video is great, we record it, get it into Facebook Live, get it into YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the whole bit. Circle back with your guests to make sure the guests have the episode linked in an easy way for them to share their episode because they want to do it. Let's just make it easy for them to do it. That cross promotion is great. And there are other elements that we build in that makes us even more better. But there are things you got to be careful of because it can be a whole waste of time. And so from that aspect, there are things that you have to be careful of, the mistakes that can be time costly and financially costly. So I've put together this video book that talks about the top 7 mistakes to avoid to get an ROI from your podcast. And you can go to videosocials.vip, not videosocials.com, but videosocials.vip for video interview podcast, and grab that video book and make this work for you. One way or another, you can do it on your own, or you can work with us. One way or another, you can make it and you can do it well. Gabrielle, thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. And I know you got to run, so you can go ahead and do what you got to do. But Vikram Rajan, thank you so much for. I'll just put you on the screen again. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
I'm excited to be on this show. I'm looking forward to sharing the episode with my circle.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I will let you go now. All right, you guys. And it is just you and me. So I just want to reiterate Vikram's contact information. So his website, which he said is www.videosocials.vip. He is also on LinkedIn. It is under his name, Vikram Rajan, which is spelled Vikram. First name, last name is Rajan. And he is also on Facebook, which is his personal Facebook. So you can reach him there. It is just his first name, Vikram. So I encourage you to seek him out, seek out his services. So he helps uh, people set up their podcast, and he helps small business owners get into the podcasting world. He also provides one-on-one coaching, I believe. So if you are seeking those services, I encourage you to reach out to him. So again, you could check out his website. Excuse me. Woo. You can check out his website, www.videosocials.vip. He is also on LinkedIn if you just check for his name, and on Facebook as wow. Woo! And on Facebook as well. So definitely check him out. All right, you guys. And that is it for our guests. So now it is my turn. All right, you guys. So we have reached the conclusion of our episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, wherever you are hearing the sound of my voice right now, please check out our platform for more videos and clips. And don't forget to follow us. Follow us, subscribe, like, follow, whatever the directive is, whatever that button is. I want you to press that button and press it right now. And while you're at it, please let us know what you thought about this episode by leaving a comment in the comment section or in the comment thread. I would love to hear your thoughts. And as a reminder, this web series is a production of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So if you would like to learn more about our company, what we're about, the services that we have to offer, who is this crazy girl, Gabrielle? Well, let me tell you, you could learn more about me and my company, or my company and I. You can learn about the both of us on our website, www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. And you can also find us on a variety of social networking platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Eventbrite, WhatsApp, YouTube. So we are in a variety of places. Did I say Twitter? I think I said Twitter. But either way, we're on Twitter, and you could find us in a variety of other places as well. So definitely reach out to us. I I will appreciate that. And I just want to share this quick coupon that we will offer you 15% off 6 hours of tutoring if you mention that you heard about us from Hot Topics. So, again, I want to reiterate that. So, for those of you looking for tutoring services, whether for yourself or for your child, I, Gabrielle, am declaring this coupon that we, A Step Ahead, will give you 15% off 6 hours of tutoring if you mention that you heard about us from Hot Topics, right? So say, hey, I heard about you on that show, Hot Topics, and boom, 15% coupon. So we definitely encourage you to use that coupon and seek our tutoring services. Why not? 15% off? Who could say no to discounts? And finally, I, Gabrielle, encourage you to sign up for our email list and our texting list. You will receive exclusive announcements, promos. You'll get the inside scoop on all that is a step ahead, as well as all that's going on in the education and tutoring world. So I encourage you to stay in touch with us by signing up for our email list and our texting list. For those of you watching this on video, that information is scrolling below at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you listening to this on audio, that information is on our website, but it is also in the description of this episode. So definitely check that out and sign up for our email list and our texting list. Stay in touch with A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. All right. And before we officially close, I have this final message that I am going to share.
Hey there, have you heard of us? We're a small team of tutors here at A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. We believe that education and information should be accessible to everyone, regardless of income, race, or creed. We're dedicated to making this happen, but we need your help. Please consider making a donation to our company. No amount is too small. Your donation will allow us tutors to remain employed, offer free and low-cost services, put on productions like this web series, and reach out to families nationwide. With your help, we can tackle the academic challenges of our students and the emotional, mental, and behavioral changes that result from these challenges. As a bonus, we can improve our communities in the process. Support us today. Send your donation by Cash App to $ASATS 2013, by PayPal or Venmo to @ASATS 2013, or by Zelle to success at astepaheadtutoringservices.com. Let us know if you have any questions. Please note, we're a for-profit company. We're not a charity. Your donation may not be tax deductible. Please consult a tax professional.
Awesome, awesome. And whoa, adjusting my screen. All right. And that is it for our episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. And now I am signing off. Bye.